From the confirmation hearings of Supreme Court Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson to the constant scrutiny of Vice President Kamala Harris, and now the recent resignation of Harvard's first black female president, black women have commented and observed that they are held to an impossibly high standard, with many feeling the merits of their leadership and scholarship questioned and second-guessed. In a New York Times op-ed, Gay said, quote, "Those who had relentlessly campaigned to oust me since the fall often trafficked in lies and ad hominem insults, not reasoned argument. They recycled tired racial stereotypes about black talent and temperament. They pushed a false narrative of indifference and incompetence," unquote. Adding to the controversy, retreating from affirmative action at colleges to cutbacks in diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts in corporations. Joining us today is Beth Chandler. She's the president and CEO of YW Boston, an organization dedicated to advancing social justice through eliminating racism and empowering women. Beth, welcome. You issued a statement on behalf of the YW Boston in response to the resignation of Claudine Gay.
Yes.
Does Gay's characterization of what happened to her align with yours?
Yes, it does. We have seen, and there's research that shows that black women have to work twice as hard to be considered equally as competent as their white male peers. And there's research that documents that. And so, yes, what happened to Dr. Gay does align with what we have been seeing.
And in fact, we do have some of that data. According to a 2019 McKinsey & Company survey conducted in partnership with leanin.org, 40% of black professional women say they need to provide more evidence of their competence compared to 28% of white women and 14% of men. So why are black women having to defend their right to positions they've already been hired for?
Right, it's a great question, and I think a lot of that has to come into structural issues and how women are perceived, and particularly women of color, how they are perceived. And so that, because we can't view women of color equally, we always come up with reasons for why they can't do or shouldn't be able to do things. And I think it comes out with Dr. Gay, and there was a report out afterwards where colleges are starting to sign a pledge saying we will hire for merit only. And that suggests that Dr. Gay wasn't hired based on merit. Just because somebody has a different identity doesn't make them less than. But often when you hear conversations around diversity, equity, inclusion, we're going to hire diverse candidates, then there's that's immediately followed by, oh, but we have to make sure that they are qualified. Who's to say somebody's not qualified because of the identity that they hold, whether it's race, gender, immigration status? But we have somehow equated that if you are not a white male, then you are somehow less than.
And are these some of the points that you stated in your piece on the front of the Y website?
There are some of them, yes. And just generally how black women in particular are perceived less than, have to work twice as hard to be considered half as good. And that's something that we really need to think about as a country if we are going to move forward.
So Claudine Gay, of course, a very high profile example, been in the news. But what about other women in less visible positions? And some more data. The same study we quoted earlier stated that 49% of black women feel that their race or ethnicity will make it harder for them to get a raise, promotion, or a chance to get ahead. And with these perceptions, will we see black women, do you think, going after these roles if they already feel disadvantaged, or for some reason maybe not pushing for higher positions?
I think we have seen that already. I have certainly, and through our work, we have heard from black women who have said, I'm leaving the workforce because I'm tired of not getting recognized for the work that I'm doing. We see it with pay, that women, and particularly black women, are not getting paid the same as they should be of their white colleagues, whether they are male or female. So we are seeing time and time again that particularly black women are doing just as well, if not better, work-wise than their peers, and they have aspirations higher than their peers to be in leadership positions, yet they're not getting those roles. And when they are getting roles, they are getting paid less than their peers.
Sometimes they're just tired, just want to hang it up.
Yes.
There's a woman of color now running for the highest office in the United States. And at a CNN town hall last week, candidate Nikki Haley said the following: I think you look at what Biden has done, and he said, I want this kind of Supreme Court justice, or I want this kind of vice president. That's a mistake. I do think America is ready for a female president. I do think that America has been ready, but it's got to be the right one, is what Nikki said. When you hear this, what do you think she's really saying?
It's what happens all the time. It's somehow if you are not white, and particularly if you're not a white male, you're not the right one. In her case, she's saying, well, I'm a white woman, so I'm the right one. And again, anytime we're talking about people that have different identities, whether it's race, gender, sexual orientation, somehow that makes them less than. And that is the language that she's using. Whether she's not coming out directly with it, it's pretty clear, I think, to most people what she's saying.
But of course, Nikki Haley is not a white woman. She's a person of color.
Ah.
Right.
Well, I guess, but she is perceived,
That's
I
correct.
think, as a white woman, and I
That
think
may be how she self-identifies.
Right, and I think that also makes a difference. It might be we might not think of ourselves in a particular way, but how does society see us? And society can certainly see her as a white woman, which may make it easier for her than even though she may identify as a woman of color versus somebody who has darker skin hue, where people can't perceive them in any other way.
Now, the state of Texas has a new anti-DEI law which shuts down diversity, equity, and inclusion offices in public institutions of higher education. How has the Supreme Court's decision on affirmative action influenced your work or the demand for your work in DEI, or has it not impacted?
It certainly has. And I will say a couple of things. One, I don't think it is aligned with what the country wants. And there was a survey done by Harris Poll that showed an overwhelming number of people, regardless of how they identified racially, believed that DEI was important. They believe that that is how organizations perform better when they have diverse people in different positions who are able to share their perspectives, their lived experience, and they are all qualified, right? So people believe that as a country, this is what we believe. So I think the decision by both the Supreme Court and what Texas is doing is wrong. It's not, we have never said as YW Boston that you need to have a certain percentage of people in different roles and that you shouldn't hire people based on how they identify. So we have never said do not hire white males. What we have said is what is happening within your institutions to ensure that everybody has an opportunity to be successful. Because we know that organizations are more successful when they have diverse people in leadership positions. And that's race, that's gender, that's sexual orientation, that's religion, right? And so we are a country that is diverse. So that diversity should be represented in our academic institutions as well as our other institutions.
All right, Beth Chandler, President and CEO of YW Boston, thanks for carrying forth the mission of Dr. King and pushing forward social justice.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Appreciate you being here. Up next, a closer look at the Black Panther Party, the lesser-known facts about its membership, and celebrating Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. The Boston Youth Symphony Orchestras and the Museum of African American History are hosting a special performance tomorrow afternoon at Kresge Auditorium on the MIT campus. Tickets are free. And tomorrow afternoon, the Boston Children's Chorus performs its 21st annual MLK Tribute Concert at Symphony Hall at 4 p.m. Get tickets at bostonchildrenschorus.org.